Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Rich Mellon, and today we are doing a remote podcast with one of our very good friends who's very big in the fur industry, and she is back east of us, central in Canada. I have Sandi with me. Sandi, introduce our guest.
So we have Mary Shellenberg with us today, and we met Mary a number of years ago. She is very, very skilled in the fur industry, and we're very pleased to have you with us today, Mary. Thanks so much for joining.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation.
So I thought we would maybe just start with, where did you grow up? Where were you born? And have you always been part of the fur industry?
Okay, well, actually, no, definitely not. I grew up outside Montreal on I guess you'd call it a hobby farm of about 20 acres. Went to school in so-called town. And my dad had goats and chickens and ducks and that kind of thing, but he worked at the agricultural college, which is McDonald, which was part of McGill. I went to school in town, like I say, all the time, and I actually went for a couple of years at the college as well. I would say the only interaction I had with any fur-bearing animals at that time was seeing a muskrat frozen in a pond one time when I was skating, and raccoons that liked to harass my dad's chickens and ducks.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So you grew up then, as you say, on a hobby farm, and, interaction obviously with domestic stock. Then how did, apart from the frozen muskrat and the harassing raccoons, how did you find your way into the fur industry?
Well, once I finally flapped my wings and left Montreal Island, I headed west and was traveling with friends of mine who were actually from Newfoundland, and we settled in Winnipeg, and I got a job here right away, not in the fur industry. I worked with Jostens, the yearbook and ring people, but while I was there, I worked with an individual, and he left that business, and then he phoned me up after I had also left there to have my first girl, and asked if I would do some data entry for him. So I said, sure, if I can work it into my schedule of, babysitters and such like. So next thing I know, here I was doing data entry for Dominion Sudak Fur Auction. And
wow.
that's where that started.
Was that, Mary?
Pardon?
How many years ago was that?
1988 is when I started there.
Wow.
So, I still didn't know anything about fur then. Data entry was what I was doing for them. I had no clue. The only thing was when I first went there, they gave me a tour of the building, which was here in Winnipeg, and I was absolutely shocked by the number of beaver pelts that were in the building at the time. As I recall, there was a couple of floors with stacks of beaver pelts from the floor to the ceiling. And I'm like, is there any left in nature? I mean, you could take them all. But that was back in the days when beaver was still worthwhile.
Worth a lot of money.
Yes, some money. Yeah, I think about that time was probably around $40-$45 average.
Wow. We'd love those days again.
Yes, we would.
So the progression from there, Dominion got bought, or did you move into with another company?
No, so I stayed with Dominion Sudak on a very casual basis for the first couple of years, and gradually learned different things in their procedures in their office. And during that time, of course, Hudson Bay took over, and then shortly thereafter that became North American Fur Auctions. So I worked for the three different companies and gradually learned a bit more about the fur industry, about the fur, because we oftentimes hired casual people to do jobs, whether it was counting skins or that kind of thing. And on occasion, they'd leave for lunch and not come back. So here I was in my dress clothes, high heels, going and helping out on the muskrat floor or with the squirrels, with the weasels, any number of things. So I got a little bit more acclimatized to it all, and then gradually dealt with some of the trappers a bit more. I hadn't up until that point. I knew the names. I just didn't know who they were. And then in I believe it was 99, they downsized our Winnipeg operation substantially. And because I knew all the office routines and how all that went and all the advances and postings and things like that, I ended up staying to basically run the office while most of the grading and everything left to go to Toronto. Well, the first thing I had to do was give an advance on some Fisher. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But you'd be surprised how fast you learn. And really? It's evolved since then.
So you ended up handling a lot of fur then. You would actually grade fur.
I wasn't grading. I mean, when you have to do advances, you have to have a good idea of what you're looking at as far as value is concerned.
Right. So that's in the rough definition, you're grading it.
Somewhat,
good,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Not a conclusive grading, but certainly enough to know good from bad and those kind of things. And over time, because I've just done so much of it, it comes fairly easily.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know. I mean, I wanted to hear the story how this happened. So you ended up then having to be basically a one woman shop in Winnipeg, right?
I mean, it wasn't just myself, but yeah, there was only a few of us here then, and yeah, shipping, receiving, you name it.
Wow.
So, what is your best terrible shipping story?
No, I can't say those things. No, it's not good.
I can imagine that there's a very huge range in the quality of put up and dryness and pelts and that sort of stuff that gets shipped to you.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, in that regard, I had a gentleman bring in some fur the other day, and he had a wolf that he'd done up, and I went to take a look at it because he said it was the nicest one he'd had from his area, and pick up the paws, and they're all wet. So I said, it's not dry yet. Well, he said, I put salt in there. And I said, yeah, you did, but they're just sopping wet because the salt absorbs the moisture, but stays wet. So
yeah, exactly.
I was busy digging salt out of those paws the other day.
Wow.
I was fascinated. I spoke to you back in the summertime there, and we were talking about the price of castor is up so high. And I'd always been told that, you had to make sure your castor was so dry before you sent it. And then you told me that it didn't matter where the castor came from or what it looked like. You always set it out for 3 days to dry before it was classified or graded or anything. Oh,
sometimes even longer than that. I mean, the castor, when it comes in, we always open it up. We put it on like a drying rack of sorts, because oftentimes they come in frozen. I mean, they've been dried previously, but they're frozen, so there's a little bit too much moisture there. So we'll put them on those drying racks, and they'll wait there till we're ready to grade them.
So,
how do you grade a castor, Mary?
Okay, not something I do, but generally the what we call the first grader, the number one grade, is a full castor sack. I know they have a formula for weight. If it's over a certain weight, it's definitely number one. The second grade is not as full, but, still there's a fair amount of the castor material in them. And then, of course, we have the third grade, which is the shell, which is basically exactly that, shell, but still usable by either in the different people who are buying it, either for perfume or for lure or for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, I found the easiest way to think about it is if you thought about a kid's rubber toy balloon. When it's empty and flat, that's a shell. When it's partially filled, that's number 2. And when it's full and plump the way it should be, that's number 1.
Yeah.
So how much castor would have gone through your operation in a year?
Well, I would say quite a lot of years ago, in fact, probably back in the late 90s, we were dealing with around probably 6,000 or 7,000 pounds at least.
Wow.
Or if not more. And of course, that's when the beaver were worth quite a bit of money. Now, because the beaver is still so low, the amount that we're getting is, you'd be lucky to get 2,000 pounds in a year.
And yet demand is higher now for castor than it's ever been, right?
I would, it certainly in my experience, it is. Yes.
And what are they using castor for?
Well, like I said, it's definitely still going in the perfume industry. They are a big consumer. And then also I have sold to individuals who are using it for medicinal purposes. They're naturopaths and things like that, and they're using it in their different medicines.
Is beaver castor part of an indigenous medicine? Do you know, or is it mostly naturopath?
Historically, it was definitely a medicinal thing that they would have used.
Oh, very cool, though. The only reason I ask is we're going to go over and visit a fellow that we met this winter, and he's going to show me some of the indigenous remedies that he has. So beaver castor is probably in there.
I would think so, yes. And I know in some of the ceremonial happenings, they also use it for that. I'm not exactly sure in what manner, but on occasion we'll have somebody from the indigenous community, come in and ask if they can have some beaver castor.
Oh, well, okay.
Back in the day when the price was low, we didn't mind to give them a pound or two, but now they don't get much.
Yeah.
Well, what's number 1 averaging a pound right now?
So in talking with Don Rumford from Fur Harvesters in North Bay, we feel that we should be able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 a pound US.
Wow.
For number 1.
That is awesome.
It's incredibly high.
That is quite the demand, and it's not being filled. Do you? I know this isn't your purview, but do you know what they use what part of the castor is it? Is it the scent or is it the oil?
Okay, as far as I know, in the perfume industry, the castor is somehow reduced to a resin, and then they use it in their perfume that way. But of course, what it does for the perfume is it makes that scent last.
Oh. Boy,
and it basically it enhances anything that it's in.
What women will do to smell good.
I don't think it's just women. Men wear cologne.
No, not real men.
Some should.
Oh, ouch. So eventually then, if I understand correctly, you ran the warehouse for NAFA in Winnipeg.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how big of a facility was that?
We have about 5,000 square feet here or so, and we would consolidate the shipments from the west and then ship them on to Toronto for the auction.
Okay. Can I ask some of the numbers? Like, how many coyotes would come out of the West in a year, average year or a good year?
Well, I would say that in a good year, we didn't handle them all through here because we simply didn't have the space. So a lot of our agents would be shipping directly to Toronto. And, I'd say Saskatchewan probably in the last few years was averaging at least, probably 12,000 coyotes a sale. And then, of course, Alberta with their good numbers, probably close to that. And Manitoba, excuse me, not a huge producer, but they added another few thousand anyway.
Right. So that's a lot of coyotes for each and every sale.
Mm-hmm.
What was the fur that was the most common?
Well, these days it is definitely coyotes. And for Manitoba, the marten or sable is usually a big number as well, because of course when you're trapping you can get quite a few at a time, right? So that has generally for the last few years has been the big numbers. Of course, back when I first started, obviously beaver was. I think in those days probably coyotes were only worth $15.
Yeah, I do remember coyotes being, if you got $20 or $30 for a coyote, that was unbelievable money.
Mm-hmm.
And what about muskrat, Mary? Where did they kind of fall in?
Okay, so back quite a number of years ago, muskrat production was really good, across the prairies. We would get, I'm trying to think, maybe 20,000 at least. But the last number of years that production has fallen right off, not because of price necessarily, but just because there seems to be no muskrats.
Interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. We have no shortage of them
very
here.
Few.
Yeah. Right.
Pardon?
I say we have no shortage of them here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But Saskatchewan and they've had drought for a number of years, and of course that doesn't work well for muskrats come wintertime. So
that's true. We've also this year we're seeing more muskrat push-ups in some of the smaller bodies of water that we haven't seen them in for 2 or 3 years. So you never know if there's just been a big population and they got a disease or something like that, and maybe that was part of it. But do you find that price does enter into it? I mean, we talked about beaver and that there's not as many beaver now. The price isn't as good for the pelt itself, although the castor still pays money. And then now with coyote, the prices are great, and so the numbers are up. So do you find that muskrat is kind of like that?
Oh, the muskrat prices sort of stayed the same. But I mean, in other articles, it definitely seems to make a big difference. I did a talk one time in Saskatchewan at one of their conventions, and my ending sentence every time was, "You guys are in it for the money." And,
right.
I mean, I don't, not necessarily for everybody, but it certainly is a deciding factor for many of the trappers when they know what kind of money they're going to have to spend to get whichever species they're going after. And then they'll say, yeah, I'm not going to bother.
It is an odd commodity because there are no futures in it, right? You know, like if you're going to produce oil next year, you already know what futures are for June oil next year, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
That way.
Yeah, the commodities is that way. And this is one where our futures are going to be set here in a month at fur harvesters. You know what I mean? That's going to set what the prices are for this year, but it's all after the animals have been caught and processed and everything else.
Well, I keep telling guys it's a crapshoot,
Yeah.
You roll the dice. Well, you see what happens. I guess trappers as a whole are gamblers.
Probably. Speaking of trappers, you must have met some characters over the years.
Oh, definitely many. And I will say this for trappers as a whole, that as a community, they are second to none as a group of people. Down to earth, interesting to talk to. I'm always intrigued by what they're seeing when they're out on the line, their observations. I call them scientists sometimes, researchers.
Right.
All those things. But yes, I have met definitely some characters in the industry.
Does anybody particularly stick out for being a good storyteller?
Well, I mean, there's one fellow out of Alberta who he's pretty good with a knife, especially when it comes to beaver. And he would be one of those characters.
Yes, I know who you're talking about.
I figured you might.
Yeah. Yes, we've shown his knife work on one of the Trapping Inc. episodes, and he is right. It gets all kinds of comments. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I mean, you know, some people are really good at playing a violin, and other people, are concert violinists, and then there's the other ones who are the prodigies, and he's a prodigy when it comes down to his ability with a knife. And I've watched him, and when I've filmed him, I've filmed him skinning beaver, and I can take there are the same amount of strokes with the knife for each part of the beaver. So many strokes are going around the left leg, so many strokes going around the right leg. And I've taken apart, because there'd be people talking in the background. And so I've taken it apart and taken out one piece and put in a piece from another beaver. And you would never know that it wasn't all one beaver. That's how precise he is with a knife. Another guy summed it up. I think Gordy summed it up when he said, there's country music and then there's Garth Brooks.
Well, this is true.
Yeah.
Well, we know lots of trappers in Alberta, as you know. We've met you here at the Rendezvous many times, but we don't know as many trappers over in the Manitoba and Eastern. So do you encounter trappers out that way or from Ontario, or do you kind of where?
Mostly I'm dealing with trappers from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. Because I go to conventions I get to meet them all personally, right? Meet their families, get to know who they really are. And I'd say that's one of the best parts of my job. I have made some fabulous friends that are all part of the trapping community.
Oh, I agree. I love the rendezvous, the conventions, and that. I mean, it is like one giant family. Like anybody says, what are trappers like? I said, well, they're like carpenters, or like doctors. Like, I mean, any slice of population you want to take out of civilization, you're going to have some good and some bad, right? But when it seems like the ones that come together at those conventions and that, it's all just one huge family, and it is so enjoyable. And I forget who it was, but he said, where else would you get together where all these kids would be running around everywhere?
With a pocket knife.
Yeah, with a pocket knife. And he said, and a sharp one, and we expect him to cut something with it.
I think that's the best part of rendezvous, and maybe that's where we should go next. But they are such a family affair, I mean, you go to a lot of other conventions, for whatever type of industry that you might be in, and children don't really feature very highly in any of that. And yet, particularly the Alberta Trappers Rendezvous, the kids are all about getting involved, and the parents want them involved. So I was just wondering then, do you see that theme with a number of different conventions and rendezvous that you attend?
I would have to give kudos to Alberta for probably directing their attention to that whole youth thing. Although I will say that Saskatchewan and BC as well are trying really hard. It's difficult as the trapping community is aging. There seems to be less and less children involved. I don't know if it's a time factor for the younger families. Not too sure. I know in Manitoba they struggle to get a lot of youth at their events. Here in our building, we get a fairly large walk-in trade, as we like to call it, and they'll come as a family. So I'll have the little kids here as well as the teenagers and everything, and we are very happy to see that.
So tell me, with all of these, you keep talking about the 4 provinces that you deal with trappers and that from. Are there differences in how things are done? Like, can you tell fur put up from a Manitoba trapper as compared to an Alberta trapper, or are there anything like that, or are we pretty universal?
I think over time it is. I think there's been a lot more education as far as that is concerned. So you're going to find great guys who are just fabulous at fur handling in all provinces. You're also going to find that people who just don't seem to have that knack or even care to. We try here when they come in here, if there's stuff they've done wrong, we try and, give them pointers on what they could do to improve. Then you get the guy who does a great job, comes in and says, "What am I doing wrong?" And you have to tell him nothing.
Well, sometimes, it comes down to, and I say it many, many times, but that fur is as good as it's ever going to get by the time I've caught it. Like all I can do from there is harm it. What I want to be is harm neutral and not damage it putting it up. But what are some of the big errors that you see or mistakes that people make?
I think, a lot of times with, especially with some of the, perhaps some of the younger ones, and I shouldn't say that, even some of the older ones who refuse to change their ways, you'll get, skins with, too much fat left on them or done the wrong way. So raccoon, which should be a leather out article, is done with the fur out. Now, leather out, it might have been a great grade, a really good grade, but because it's been done fur out, that grade is down right away. Those kind of things can definitely hurt a guy's returns.
Okay, just to interrupt you, and we'll come back to other mistakes, but can you tell me why some animals are leather out? I don't. It's something I've been asked and I wasn't sure of.
Okay, in certain animals, so the muskrat, the raccoon, the mink,
otter,
and the otter. A lot can be. You can tell a lot on the quality of the animal and the imperfections by looking at the leather. Far more than if just looking at the fur. If you were looking at an otter that had big trap marks on the leather, if it was fur out, you wouldn't necessarily see that.
So why do we do any of them?
Those kind of things can make it slip when it gets tanned.
Oh, okay.
So you need to see the leather on those articles.
Okay, so it's not the same then for a martin or a fisher or a coyote?
Or link.
No.
Okay, so then there's not a chance of them slipping at that spot. Is that?
Well, I suppose it could happen, but you'll usually see on the longer hair ones, like a martin, you may see problems. It may already be slipping, but a fisher, you'll definitely see if there's a snare mark on there. Same on a coyote. Okay. You'll see it in the fur.
Okay, I was always curious why there was just a handful of the short ones. People were saying it was because they were so greasy, that was the best way to in case the more oil oozed out of them over the time, it wasn't inside where it could go rancid or whatever. And none of that really made sense to me, but I see what you're talking about now. What other mistakes do people make?
You'll run across people who put animals on the wrong size board. I suppose in the long run, it doesn't end up really, it could hurt them because maybe they won't get the size that it should be. Definitely in the beaver, when the guy uses 6 nails, he'll get downsized. He'll get downsized right away.
For sure. I know one of the fellows that was receiving at the Alberta Trappers Association store showed us muskrats one time, and they had been pulled over top of an asphalt shingle.
Oh, no.
Well, when I was a kid, we made stretchers for squirrels and weasels and muskrats and that from cedar shingles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what I can only suppose that somebody told him to make a stretcher out of a shingle, and he took that to mean an asphalt shingle. I don't know that anybody's got those hides off yet. So, so eventually, and this was the first time I ran into you, was, I don't know, half a dozen years ago. You were the person that everybody went to if there was anything wrong in the world that had to do with fur and NAFA. You talked to Mary. That's how I found you. I'd been dealing with one of your coworkers, Dave Buick, and he'd set up helped me set up my account, and I don't know, for whatever reason, we're remote, we're out here in the sticks and that, and whatever reason, I had problems, and he helped, and it didn't go any better. So he says, "Here, talk to Mary, she'll get it straight." And you became the person that could answer everything and anything while pretty much running the place, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, when Dave was still working here, I was, I guess I was his right arm at times. So then when he finally retired, then I just took over.
That's good.
But
that's good.
I've always wanted to, if a guy's having problems with something, I want to help.
Well, and that shows in your attitude. So we recently had a massive earthquake within the fur world with NAFA going into receivership, and I just got a letter, I think yesterday, the day before. They're still trying to do a restructure in that, and that ended them dealing in wild fur and put you out of a job. You ended up then doing what you'd been doing for NAFA, but now you're doing it for Fur Harvesters Auction for Western Canada, correct?
That's correct. When I saw that my position with NAFA was quickly coming to an end, I decided I didn't like the Titanic, so I jumped. I jumped. I don't know if I jumped or I got pushed, but I did approach Fur Harvesters and suggest that it would be to their benefit to take over the Winnipeg location as their central location for the West. We already knew the trappers. We knew the process for most everything, and it seemed the most logical to help Fur Harvesters and also to help the trappers to continue to have places to market their fur.
And, with trappers, a lot, like you say, are getting older, and that to be able to talk to Mary, whether you were talking at NAFA or to now Mary at Fur Harvesters, that's a very important thing. That's a huge confidence builder. And with the shakeup that's happened,
yes, I have to say it has been humbling for me, the number of people that have expressed their gratitude for me continuing on in the fur industry and continuing on with Fur Harvesters. They don't feel like they've been abandoned too badly.
Well, when NAFA was hitting the rocks and the ship was looking in bad shape and you were either jumping or getting pushed, Sandi and I were talking about you and saying, Sandi says, I sure hope Mary's okay. I sure hope. And then, I talked with Mark afterwards, and he said, that he'd hired you and that you just got half of Canada and he got half the headaches. Life was pretty good for him. He was so happy to have you at Fur Harvesters.
So, well, Mary,
I'm glad that I'm now part of their team.
Yeah, I can well imagine. It's different but similar in so many ways. That I don't know whether your office is exactly the same, but at least you're in the same building. So how many people would be employed where you're located?
Okay, so traditionally, it's been for the last number of years, it's been myself, and then I'd had 2 seasonal workers, usually from October till about the end of June. And because at that time we were still grading the ermine and squirrels here, I also had 2 graders that came in to do that. Now there'll be myself as well as 3 seasonal workers, because fur harvesters, in their efforts to, I think, streamline and make things move well, is we're going to be drumming and grading the western coyotes here.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
So that didn't happen before then, is that correct?
That hasn't happened. Well, we haven't graded coyotes since 99 in Winnipeg, but we were drumming up until, I think, 2006, I believe, or 7.
Okay. So this is in the same, is it about 5,000 square feet, you said, the space that you're in?
A little bit. We're in the exact same space. I didn't have to change where I drove my car to or where I parked or where I sit.
Well, there's something to be said for familiarity, right?
This is true. Yeah.
So here we are, post the Titanic going down. We're looking at our first auction coming up. What's actual dates of Fur Harvester's first auction this year?
March 28th to the 31st.
Okay. And it's going to be the biggest one Fur Harvesters has ever had?
I do believe so.
Okay. Are you getting big turnout as far as people sending fur in, or you really just started picking up a week or so ago, didn't you?
That's true. This past week has been quite busy. Prior to that, it was kind of slow, but Thursday, Friday, and then I couldn't believe the number of people that came in today, because we're actually been having a bit of a snowstorm here and the roads are horrible, but still they were coming in from the north, the south, the east, the west.
So you actually have people
in their fur.
People actually come right to your building and drop fur off.
Absolutely. Yes.
How do you ever get anything done? I mean, every trapper out there is like so ready to talk to somebody for a day or two.
This is sometimes an issue. Yes.
Do you find now this year with NAFA not being in the business any longer, or at least currently, are you dealing with more fur buyers now, or are you dealing with the same people that you've dealt with before?
Okay, so obviously, you're well aware that the American company Groenwald Fur has moved into Western Canada, and they are definitely buying quite a bit. But from what I can see now, I think that we're doing probably better than I expected as far as numbers. It's difficult when you've worked for a company that has a tainted reputation, and you wonder if it's tainted your own reputation. But it seems like not. They seem quite happy to come in here, and many, many, many of them have never shipped to Fur Harvesters. So this is a first for them.
Oh, I know.
But they're okay with it.
Well, we've fielded a ton of questions like, how do we set up an account or whatever? And I talked with Mark, and he said, just send it in and we'll set up the accounts when they get here, you know? And I tell people that, and they do it. They just do it, you know? I mean,
there's a lot of trust, I think, still of people, you know, despite, reputation of a lot of trappers that, they kind of live in the bush all winter and they don't talk to people, and they're a bit suspicious. I think when they trust people and someone says, this is what you should do, then they do it. And obviously they trust you, Mary. And if you're at Fur Harvesters, that has to be one of the biggest things that keeps the confidence up in the trappers.
Yes, I mean, again, it's humbling. It's very humbling, but I appreciate that support very much.
So with the fur buyers, though, like it's just exploded. We went from, well, Mary, you would have known every fur buyer in Alberta by name, and you would have counted them on one hand 2 years ago, right?
True. Mm-hmm.
And now, you know, I mean, I ran out of hands and toes and everything else, and there's 30 or 40 different people that are advertising they're buying fur now. But most of that fur is going to end up right back at the auction, isn't it?
I think with some of it, those obviously it's the coyote that 99% of them are after.
Yep.
That won't probably make it to the auction. They probably have private buyers for it already.
Really?
I would imagine so. And then, but a lot of maybe some of the other goods which they don't have a market for, those may end up at the auction.
I was thinking that, you know, a lot of them were buying coyote just strictly to, you know, send them back through the auction. And if they made 20 or 30 bucks per coyote, that they were happy with it.
Oh, some of the smaller ones may be doing that. I mean, over the last number of years with the high coyote prices, the private buyers that were dealing in Alberta, especially, where you are more used to them than certainly Saskatchewan or Manitoba was, they all had private markets for most of the coyotes.
Okay. Grunwald has they do a lot of direct sales net to China and that, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
So I had a question about the auctions, Mary. Have you ever been able to attend when you were with NAFA an auction?
Yeah, I actually this last May, the May sale, I was actually there. I've been to a few, but that was the latest one was this last May.
So tell us a little bit about, because we've never been to one, and I doubt very much that many of our listeners or very many trappers have actually attended an auction. So what does it look like? How is it organized, and what do you expect when you go to an auction?
Well, I mean, an auction's an auction, right? But normally you'd have somebody up front there with whatever the article is, you know, auctioning it off right on stage. Whereas when it comes to the fur, after it's been graded, they pull out samples of each grade, and the buyers, when they go there, they go prior to the sale. They have a catalog with strictly numbers, right? And a bit of description in it. And they say, oh, I want to see the sample for this particular lot. So somebody will go and get them that sample. They can take a look at it. Usually they make notes in their catalog. And then when it comes time for selling, then they're sitting in the auction room with their catalog in front of them. They don't have to see the goods. They've already seen them, and they'll bid accordingly.
Okay. So that, then is there, I think, as I understand it anyway, that certain fur is auctioned on certain days, organized and according to, I don't know whether it's the quantity or whether it's when buyers are going to be there. And then I think wild fur was at a different time than the ranched fur too, correct?
Yes, that I mean, when it came to North American fur auctions, they would establish what they call an order of sale, not necessarily based on the quantity so much as where did it best fit, and who's coming to buy it. We better make sure they're here, right? So you kind of work it that way as well.
Yeah, because some fur really has niche markets, doesn't it?
Yes, like North American would had. I believe we were putting the the marten and the fisher in with some of the ranch mink that it went well with, and that's kind of where it was sold. A lot of the wild fur would be, in a 2-day event kind of thing.
Yeah, I was told once that the major buyer for otter fur is Tibet, and that it just struck me as so odd. And I never got to follow up with the guy, and so I don't know whether it's really true or not. But it stuck with me for I heard this a couple of years ago, and that was why there was only certain sales that otter actually sold on. It was because if Tibet showed up or not. True or not?
I don't think that's quite true. The way I understand, and this is when otter was, $150, $200 a piece. The Chinese were buying it, and until the point where the Dalai Lama said that otter were an endangered species. However, he was not talking about river otter. He was talking about sea otter. And precisely after he made that announcement, that the following sale, we couldn't get a hand up to buy an otter.
Right. And the Dalai Lama is from Tibet.
I believe it's a kind of a ceremonial dress as well there.
Right.
Like they had a huge market for it.
That's fascinating because the river otter in North America is the only otter species that is trapped in the world. I mean, other than you do have some indigenous that can trap the sea otter in Alaska, mm-hmm. But other than that, the only one in the world is the river otter in North America.
Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to auctions, Mary, what would surprise people about what goes on behind the scenes?
I'm not sure what goes on behind the scenes. No, I mean, like I say, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. Most of the buyers that are coming to an auction have a fairly good idea of what they're looking for. Sometimes, and I know in the really good years, we would have Chinese buyers at the sale who had no idea what they were buying and would pay ridiculous prices for them.
Really?
That didn't happen too often. Usually after the first year, they got it figured out. But
never to one of the lots that my fur was in.
No. I mean, those kind, and I mean, I think it's probably difficult as an auctioneer, and I'm not speaking from any experience, but to kind of know your audience, know your product, get the mood going and keep things going. So I think I know sometimes in Toronto they would have issues and the buyers would sort of gang up on the auctioneer. So would make it difficult.
So you had just started then receiving fur. What, a week ago? 2 weeks? How long?
Oh, well, I actually, whenever trapping season started, we've been getting a bid in all the time. But this, of course, because the last receiving date is actually published as tomorrow, it's been pretty frantic this week.
So you're going to have now tens of thousands of skins show up over the next week worth of shipping or so?
I would think so. So although I believe the way we've got it worked out is all our Western agents, as like Alberta Trappers, Trapper Gourds, they will be shipping us just the coyotes, and I believe everything else is going to go to North Bay.
Oh, okay. Okay. So do you have much U.S. trappers sending you fur this year?
Okay, so the U.S. stuff is handled through the Wisconsin, and that was the same with NAFA. The U.S. stuff was handled through Wisconsin. So the person that runs that show will probably be shipping the Western coyotes from, say, Montana and North Dakota probably ship them up to us here in Winnipeg, and we'll grade them in along with the Canadian ones.
It's amazing the difference between a Western coyote and an Eastern coyote.
They hardly look related.
No, exactly. And I think I know where the term brush wolf come from, because the Eastern coyote is so big and so coarse. It's so different than our Western coyote, and usually we like to brag on everything being bigger out west here, but this is one time where it's not a good thing.
Yeah, true. I gotta admit that the Eastern coyote doesn't win any beauty pageants.
No, and they get some unbelievably strange colors too. Like those black coyotes they get, they're not attractive. Not when you're used to what a coyote looks like, right? Or what you're used to, put it that way. I guess if that's what coyotes were always black where you came from, then that's what you're used to, right?
They have black coyotes in BC too.
Really?
They have had, yes. Yeah.
I guess you guys would see it all. What do you have any message that you would like to say to trappers sending you fur now, or getting ready for your auction? Or is there anything you'd like to see them do differently, or any questions that common questions you get you'd like to answer?
Well, I mean, I guess the most common is they want to know about registering and all that, and I'm just going to ask them to be patient while we handle a much larger volume of paperwork than what Fur Harvesters was used to. And for me, it's a little different because, of course, the whole data entry system is entirely different. And it's going to take me a little while to get used to that as well. But we will get it done. And I've told a lot of guys, if they want to know their account number, probably they should wait till about the end of January, and we should be caught up. Okay.
And you have a website that you want to send people to?
Well, they can go to furharvesters.com. That most of the information there is there that they need.
Okay.
Agents and pickup schedules and those kind of things, as well as the terms and conditions. And I believe you can download the pelt handling manual that they provide.
Right. Yeah, they do. They do have really nice, a real nice manual and nice measurements and pictures. I enjoy their stuff. So, how's your
really
own
nice website?
Yeah. How is your own old trapper Mel doing there?
Well, he's pretty busy putting up fur for people and still building boards. And yeah, he'll be happy when I go home today because I sold a bunch more.
There you go. I don't think there's many days when Mel isn't happy.
Right.
Well, we will let you go, Mary. We appreciate you taking time in what has to be the craziest point of your whole year, perhaps maybe even your decade, to come talk to us here on the podcast, and we truly appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Mary.
Well,
it's really been good to have you here.
Okay, thank you both. You are great ambassadors, I think, and terrific comedians.
It's sad to say that I think most of that comes naturally.
Thank you, Mary. Take care, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, everyone.